Thank you very much for those very gracious words, and thanks very much for the invitation to spend some time, not too much time, speaking to you about a few broad global trends, but also narrowing down to some realities in our own country, South Africa. I'm at a disadvantage being an economist amongst a lot of very clever people, so I'll comfort myself by making the joke myself, and also bearing in mind my time constraint, which according to that clock means I've still got about an hour and a half. But just to remind you, there are three kinds of economists: those who can count and those who cannot. So, what I want to try to do in just these few minutes is just spend a few minutes talking about some major global trends. Now, when we say global, it means that it's going to affect all of us, willingly, unwillingly, directly or indirectly. Then spending a few minutes looking at South Africa with a perhaps rather mischievous subtitle, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, and if time permits, leaving just a few thoughts in your midst, a few things to think about, to reflect upon, as we kind of gaze into the future. So the global story I build around the word foresight. That's something we often use in future studies. In fact, it's really what we're trying to achieve in future studies. The ability to make sound judgments about the future based on analyzing trends. Now, that's not very important, except I'm trying to explain why I use the word foresight and how we use the word foresight. Starting at 12 o'clock, moving clockwise, there you see the 9 letters making up that word. More specifically, these letters stand then for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a movement towards an Oriental economy, which is not just about Asia, strictly speaking, but about the developing world. It's about the fact that in the last 14 years, the world has experienced 2 of the worst recessions in living memory, in fact, even beyond living memory. It's about the fact that despite all the shorter-term negatives and bad news, a lot of empowerment has also happened over the last few decades. Not the last couple of months, but the last few decades. The 5th one, or 6th one, what is it, number 5, is the well-known story of growing concern about sustainability. The fact that there's a risk, if we're not careful, that our scarce resources will become overstrained. And we can't ignore the fact that despite major impacts that have been made, major inroads that have been made in combating poverty, that inequalities and inequities still persist. Meanwhile, especially in Europe and America and Japan, and to some extent China, aging has become a big thing. People are getting older and older and living longer and longer. Climate change cannot be ignored. And then the final one to make up the complete word is access to everything. So I'm not going to spend too much time on each one of these. They're actually fairly well known to most of us, but just try to make 1 or 2 clever statements. So regarding the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I think it fits in nicely with some of the introductory points made by some people in the audience. And that is that as important as it's going to be, of course, to be able to work with computers and the like, fundamentally, those are reckoned to be the top 10 skills we'll need to remain relevant in the workplace in the years that lie ahead. I think what's significant about these is that I think at least half of them have to do with some aspect of problem solving. Those in blue, whether it be analytical thinking, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, reasoning. 1 or 2 have to do with self-management, such as resilience, stress tolerance. A couple have to do with working with people, leadership and social influence. And then 2 have to do with managing and using technology. So it gives us a flavor already of the way in which we need to start thinking about skills. Or if you like, the way we have to think about talents. I think this one was particularly interesting. It shows us the 4 industrial revolutions thus far. And the extreme right-hand side, it indicates the important talents in each one of them. So starting with the basic ones 250 years ago, it was all about physical labor, basic engineering, and learning a skill. moved up to business acumen, reducing risk, more recently deep expertise and STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. And then the one we're now talking about, learning agility, the ability to learn new things regularly and quickly, adaptability, empathy, compassion, and then transdisciplinary thinking. No longer just multi or inter, but transdisciplinary thinking. And I think this is not only interesting, but informative when we start thinking about some of the real labor market requisites and demands and imperatives of this fourth revolution. In fact, already, as you probably know, the fifth revolution might be around the corner. It isn't, but some people say it is. And there, it really does emphasize things such as cooperation between machines and human beings, human intelligence in harmony with cognitive computing, putting humans back into the industrial production with collaborative robots, workers being upskilled to provide value-added tasks, mass customization and personalization for customers. That's my quick story about the fourth industrial revolution. And just to repeat an earlier point, here and for the rest of the 9 or the rest of the 8 forces, it will affect everybody and anybody. Excuse me. The next story has to do with the very clear shift in global economic power. Not too long ago, 20 years ago, we probably would have said that the really big movers and shakers on this planet are North America, Western Europe, and perhaps Japan. They are still pretty big, but they're no longer the only big ones that need to be reckoned with. I'm going to show you the 10 largest economies when last measured, simply measured in terms of size, and also measured a little bit technically in terms of something called purchasing power parity. So we try to get rid of the distortive effects of the day-to-day exchange rate. And then we find that the 10th biggest economy, I beg your pardon, where's 10 got? The 10th biggest economy is the United Kingdom. The 9th biggest is Brazil. The 8th biggest is Indonesia. 7th biggest is France. Number 6 is, or was until recently, Russia. Number 5 is Germany. Number 4 is Japan. Number 3 is India. Number 2 is the USA. And number 1 is China. So the message is already there. 5 of these countries are not so-called developed nations, but developing nations. We look at the next 10 biggest, and we see Mexico makes the top 12. Turkey's up there, so's Korea, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Poland. And by the way, we talk about 216 economies. I suppose at this stage people normally ask, well, what about South Africa? Where do we fit in? And the normal response is something, well, maybe 90th or 120th or 210. So the actual answer is quite interesting, and that is to observe, 218 countries. Out of 218, this country has the 28th biggest economy. So we are not a Mickey Mouse economy, not trivial, not unimportant, not irrelevant at all. Bigger than most. Bigger than 190 others, if my maths is correct. Another illustration of this power shift is the fact that between 2009 and 2030, it's expected that the number of middle-income consumers in North America and Europe will remain constant, but in South America up by 130 million. In Africa, a very pleasing increase of just over 200 million. In Asia, an increase of 2.7 billion, almost mind-boggling. But the point is that between 2009 and 2030, a 3 billion increase, of which virtually every single one will originate in the so-called southern states, southern countries. So we can talk about an economic power shift from the West to the rest. Unfortunately, all of us have lived through 2 of the worst recessions in living memory. The one was not way back, wasn't all that long ago really, 2008, 2009, financial recession. It's not me doing this, is it? Financial recession. And we thought that was bad, and it was bad. It was named the Great Recession. And although we have seen a recovery since then, that recovery was really very rocky, not all that inspiring. And up early in 2020, in fact, the first few weeks of 2020, all the clever people were saying, well, in 2020 we'll have some growth, but it won't be all that great. Little knowing, of course, that a few weeks later, it'll be much worse than just being not great. And so we had the second major recession, even worse than the first one. Where do we stand today? Well, honestly, I don't think we really know. We're in uncharted territory. There seemed to have been a very nice recovery in last year, but that seemed to have been short-lived as well. So the economists described last year as follows. First, we had a frightening slump. That was 2020. Then a fast, furious, exhilarating, and weird boom. A weird boom. At the same time, they remind us, as if we needed reminding, there are some fault lines. Already we see that those countries with rapid and comprehensive vaccination programs are faring better than others economically. The jabbed versus the jab-nots has now replaced the haves versus the have-nots. We have supply chain constraints. America, amongst others, is withdrawing, the government and their central bank, withdrawing all the stimuli that they built into their economies in the last few years. And that wasn't bad enough, of course. Even before the Ukrainian invasion, inflation rates, which internationally had been at extremely low levels, less than 1%, less than 0.5% in many countries, suddenly started moving upwards during the course of last year. And then, of course, with the Russian story, that increase accelerated. So we're looking at America, inflation rate of more than 9%, UK racing towards 10%. I never thought I'd see the day when I'll be able to say that the inflation rate in this country is lower than in America and Europe. It's getting there, but it's at the moment still lower. We obviously know about food prices accelerating, the oil price. At one stage, I checked this up a few days ago, early in 2020, the oil price was as low as $10 a barrel for a couple of days. In fact, for a couple of days, it was actually minus $10. They were paying petrol companies to come and fetch oil. It's now around about $96, but it has been even higher, but obviously that's had a major impact on prices all over the world. And this has prompted an increase in interest rates in many parts of the world. That is the classic way of trying to combat inflation. Once again, interest rates for so many years have been extremely low. In some countries in Europe, interest rates, long-term interest rates were actually negative. You, as an investor or saver, had to pay the bank if you wanted them to look after your money. Those interest rates are rising very rapidly. And all of this is coming at a time when the world is only just almost grudgingly and reluctantly trying to recover from COVID-19. Meanwhile, China, which has been the mainstay of the world economy for so many years, also has its severe problems. All kinds of indicators showing us that growth there is subsiding very rapidly. Now, that's all very relative. In China, a growth rate of 4% is deemed to be disgustingly low. We would give our back teeth for a 4% growth rate. But compared to where they've been for so many years, it is rather low. And then, just to add to all these woes, global debt is rising faster than ever before. Global debt now equates to 350% of the world economy. So however big the world economy is, the amount of debt we have is 3.5 times bigger than that. And that is not sustainable. The bottom line is that economic growth for this year and for next, globally and in different regions, is going to be disappointing. In fact, some people are using the R word again. We might be looking at a recession in some parts of the world. If not a recession, possibly slow growth and high inflation, which is a terrible combination. It is a policymaker's nightmare. The combination of slow growth and rising prices, because now you have to make a call. You either have to try to address inflation by raising interest rates, but then you're going to, the economy will be jeopardized, the growth will be jeopardized, or you lower interest rates and end up with even higher inflation. The American Federal Reserve said unashamedly, just over a week ago, their chairman, that they are going to clamp down on inflation even if it does create a recession. That's how far they're willing to go to reduce inflation. Right, for something now more happier. We tend to focus, and understandably so, on the now and the immediate and the yesterday and the tomorrow. And when we do so, it's not always good news. We take a slightly longer term view. Various people have claimed to have made the following statement: we should follow the trend lines and not the headlines. If we look at the trend lines, we actually see some very good developments over the last few decades, such as the share of girls of primary school age actually going to school has increased tremendously. Still not good enough, but much better than what it used to be. Or the number of babies younger than 1 receiving a vaccination against a childhood disease has gone from barely 20% to a much better figure. And in the event, hundreds of thousands of babies' lives have been saved. Okay, and I hope you realize how long it must have taken me to find a picture of a baby laughing despite being confronted or assaulted by a needle. Adult literacy from 10% to, well, virtually 90%. These are global figures, by the way. Women's right to vote. I'm a bit hesitant to point out that the first country allowing that, and I'm thinking now about contemporary situations on a rugby field, but the first country was actually New Zealand. And then, of course, cell phones and internet has become, if not pervasive, certainly far more used throughout the world. So in many ways, human beings are living longer lives, healthier lives, they're better educated and better integrated via the knowledge economy. The challenge we have is a very interesting one. As more and more people are escaping poverty, they're becoming middle-income consumers. And middle-income consumers use a lot of scarce resources. So for instance, I can't remember what's on the menu, but for every kilogram of beef that anybody may eat, we're also consuming 7 kilograms of grain and 20,000 liters of water. Now, ironically, therefore, the more people there are who reach middle income, well, the greater the challenge. Put differently, the more people that are who escape poverty, the greater the challenge in terms of, I'm using these very odd words, surviving prosperity. Inequality is alive and well. We can look at all kinds of interesting data and statistics, but I think that statement at the bottom captures everything. The world's richest 26 billionaires have as much money, these are companies, these are individuals, not companies, have as much money as the poorest 3.8 billion people, which is half the world's population. For those of us who are reaching slightly more advanced years, especially if they are living in Europe, life is looking a little bit problematic. Because already in Europe, for the last 10 years, we've had a situation where the number of elderly people, that is the red line, is bigger than the number of children. And that gap is getting bigger and bigger. And as a consequence, those aged 15 to 64, that number is shrinking, which means fewer and fewer people earning an income, paying tax, contributing towards funds to support a growing number of people reaching not only the age of 65, but 20, 30 years beyond that. It's a problem for the economy. It's a problem for the older workers who have to start working at 64, 65. In fact, a couple of years ago, a cynical observer said, more and more people are starting to realize they'll only be able to afford to retire about 7 years after they die. Climate change, again, there's a kind of a paradox here. I'm not a climate change expert. Even experts seem to have differing opinions. But inasmuch as at least part of this climate change is caused by human beings' behavior, then most of that behavior or inappropriate behavior occurs in the Northern Hemisphere, Europe and America. And Africa is least responsible for all of that. But Africa is most vulnerable in terms of anything ranging from food shortages, water shortages, and the like. And then finally, in some ways, revisiting the first point, in Africa alone, tele-everything. As more and more people use the internet, they gain access to tele-education, to telemedicine, as we have seen over the last couple of years, especially in the wake of COVID. Mobile money, an African invention, as it were, in recognition of the fact that until recently, most people in Africa just did not have a bank account. It didn't make sense. It wasn't practical. Walking to the nearest bank and walking back again. Now the mobile phone, pay money, receive money, and the like, and all you need is enough bandwidth. Other than that, you can be living anywhere you like on the continent. Facebook, and then of course, e-books and e-libraries. So I suppose the challenge is, for any organization or any industry, any activity, is to ask these kind of questions, as asked for a different reason by Kees van der Hayden, who said, we can't predict the future, but this is what we should be doing. As he said, of much greater value is the ability to recognize what he calls dots on the horizon, signs of change that will affect everybody. And then once you've found those dots, then trying to understand the implication or the significance of those dots. And once you've done that, then trying to figure out how you need to adapt accordingly, to at least survive, but hopefully to prosper or thrive from these stories that you discover. I've taken the liberty not of rewriting his words, but just adding my own simple words and saying we need to ask the question, what's going on out there? So what? Is it really important for us? And finally, now what? What are we going to do about it? Right, I need to do a quick time check. I know it did start later, so how much time do I have seriously?
You're doing great. Keep going.
No. That is a dangerous thing to say. Excuse me. 5? Oh, I was going to try for 10, but all right. Okay. Just so I know how to abbreviate. Right, so that's a global story which will affect everybody and anybody, directly, indirectly, willingly, unwillingly. If we turn to South Africa, then I think by now, everybody knows some of our major concerns which have developed in particular over the last 10 years. Not least of which, I'll now put on my economics cap, the fact that for the last decade or so, economic growth has gone from bad to worse. Sometimes we forget that in the couple of years just before the 2008 recession, economic growth here actually reached 6%. That's a very important figure. It's been shown over and over again in this country that if we really want to achieve not an eradication, but a major drop in poverty and unemployment and inequality, we need a 5 to 6% growth rate for at least 20 years. We kind of got there 14 years ago, 15 years ago. Unfortunately, partly due to external factors, 2 global recessions, and then self-imposed factors, that growth rate has dwindled all the way down to barely, for the last couple of years, an average of 1%. Just not good enough. The reasons for that are also well known, and there are many, and they all sort of interact with each other, ranging from, I've made the point already, international events. And by the way, bear in mind that South Africa's biggest trade partners are still Europe and America. China's also big, not quite as big as for other countries. And Europe and America have been worst affected by these 2 recessions. We've had commodity prices going up and down like a drunk yo-yo, which is bad news for a country which exports lots of commodities. We had, in the not too distant past, at a national level, a major drought. And of course, add to that, I think we're allowed to use these words now, the program, I heard somebody saying this morning, the program of state capture. Obviously ESCOM, load shedding. But fundamentally, the real reason for our economic demise has been and still is, we've become a nation of debtors. At government level, at personal level, at economic level, we actually have a surplus of deficits, too many deficits. And we've had them for too long, and now we're paying the price. Trying to reduce those deficits, in essence, means tightening the belt. And unfortunately happening at a time when we're trying to actually grow the economy. So I need to fast forward a bit here because of my own self-imposed, well, that's not bad, not a bad guess, and try to gaze into the future. Now, futurists are not trained to make predictions. Let me make that point up front. But where are we going? Where would we like to be? And perhaps the first question, or the second question first. Where would we like to be? Don't worry too much about all the funny squiggles here. But I think most would agree we'd like to be in a situation where democracy holds true, and at the same time, it delivers meaningful, inclusive, socioeconomic development. If we go back to the pre-90s, we were here somewhere. The worst of both worlds, low democracy and low inclusive development. Right now, I would argue we're here somewhere. Our democracy is bearing up, but unfortunately, it's not really delivering the promised goods. And that creates tension. It creates lots of tension. This is where we'd like to be. So the question is that feasible? And I think part of the answer is that there are 7 major tipping points or moments of truth that, if properly managed, could elevate us to a much better space, but if neglected, could unfortunately drag us down into has-beens, economic has-beens. So we've got being more competitive is a crucial ingredient for long-term success. Dealing with the democratic surplus, which I've just referred to actually, which was in that funny graph I had. Trying to figure out how this one works. Okay, that's not working, so plan B should be that. Nope, it's not. Oh dear. Okay, that's all right. I just managed to find it. A democratic surplus is where we are. I've made the same mistake. Is where we are now. More democracy and economic development. That's problematic. So we need to deal with the democratic surplus. Okay, yeah, it's not my night. How do I go back on this one, on this computer? Oh, okay. It's all right, I've discovered it. We need more trust. Our social capital is dwindling. We need more skills, obviously appropriate skills. And I use the word appropriate skills on purpose, even though my Deputy Vice Chancellor is here, Deputy Rector is here, but universities don't provide all the skills that the economy requires. It's appropriate skills. We need artisans, I almost said politicians, plumbers, electricians, boilermakers. We need more savings. We need, extremely importantly, our democratic institutions must be autonomous. And we have a young population, which, unlike the case in Europe, could potentially be a big asset, if appropriately skilled. Yeah. Now, of those, using 1 or 2 techniques we use in future studies, it turns out that those 2 I've highlighted in red are particularly decisive. We call them pivotal factors. If those can be addressed, many of the others will be indirectly or even directly addressed in the same way. Just a quick word about institutions. This is a very simple but elegantly simple graph. It simply shows us that when you plot for a wide variety of countries their economic performance, GDP per capita, against their quality of institutions, we find very simply that no rich countries, there they are, have poor institutions, and no poor countries, there they are, have good institutions. So the evidence is overwhelming. We can use these two, and I promise to start finishing now, namely the nature of skills and our institutions as the two pivotal factors to come up with 4 very simple generic scenarios. So, top right-hand corner, the best of both worlds. The right kind of skills, good institutions, gold at the end of the rainbow. Bottom left, poor institutions, poor skills, winter of discontent. Moving to the bottom right, where you have better skills but poor institutions, an Indian summer, a phrase in English when you actually into winter, you have 1 or 2 glorious days, but they're very short-lived. And then top left, where you have good institutions, skills not there yet, but hope springs eternal. All is not lost. And I've often been accused of being overly or naively optimistic. So if I had to give my current view or guess as to where we'll be in 10 years' time, I think, and don't shoot me, but I think we can make progress regarding the institutions. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month necessarily, or even next year. But I think that is doable. But even as a naive optimist, I think 10 years is not long enough to drag us into the right-hand side. So I suppose in 10 years' time, we could be hovering around there somewhere. Give us another 20 years, we could start moving gently into the top right-hand corner. Right, to really say goodbye to you, not say goodbye to you, to stop talking, I want to just leave you with one final thought, if I may, and that is that, sure, we have problems, but I think sometimes it's worthwhile just reminding ourselves, standing back a bit, and looking at the wood and not just the trees, and reminding ourselves of some very important assets, if you like, such as we are an upper middle income economy, among the 30 largest in the world. Our financial infrastructure is renowned worldwide. It's sophisticated and respected. We have a very diversified economy. 70% of this economy is derived from services, only 2% from agriculture, and about 8% from mining. And in many ways, that's a good thing. That means you don't have all your eggs in one basket. Our central bank, I'm not paid to say this, but the Reserve Bank is the one institution I think that has stood tall and proud over the last number of years. They do the right thing, not always the popular thing, but the right thing. We do have a young population. We're resilient. We've gone through these kind of things before. Pre-94, what were some of the favorite statements there? Last one to leave the country, just remember to switch the lights off. And we innovate when it suits us. So my final bit of motherhood and apple pie, if someone asks me, what does the future look like? My response these days is a little bit enigmatic, but it serves some purpose, and that is what you want it to look like. Because we far too willingly transfer responsibility for how the future pans out to somebody else. That somebody else could be the government, it could be England, it could be China, but we need to first decide ourselves what in our own opinion is a desired future. And in so doing, we need to make bold assumptions. We need to move away from the idea that things are simply impossible. We have to be willing and able to suspend disbelief. And I promise you to stop now. Just to give you some examples of this. It's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. Experts in their own fields have failed in this regard. 1901 said this gentleman, man will not fly for another 50 years. And yet 2 years later, man did fly. And in fact, the man who flew, along with his brother, was the one who said it's not going to happen for 50 years. In 1940, 80 years ago, TV introduced at the World Fair. New York Times declared. Problem with this thing is that people must sit and keep their eyes glued to the screen. Average family hasn't got time for that. It's a passing fad. In the early 60s, a certain record company said, we don't like their music, sorry, we don't like their sound, and guitar music is on its way out, so we don't want the Beatles as a client. And then finally, in 1980 something, a well-known gentleman said 640K should be enough for everybody. And that was the man himself, actually, Bill Gates. I apologize for overstating my welcome, but I also thank you for not visibly falling asleep. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and may I be so bold as to say congratulations to all of those winning prizes this evening. Thank you.